Olympic weightlifting coach course, jerk, both power jerk and split jerk. So the objectives of this module are to understand the definition of the jerk for weightlifting purposes and to discuss protocols for teaching the power and split jerk. It's also to understand some of the common errors and related correctional drills. So the jerk is defined by the International Weightlifting Federation to be the athlete bends the legs and extends them as well as the arms to bring the barbell to the full stretch of the arms vertically extended. He or she returns the feet to the same line, arms and legs fully extended, and waits for the referee's signal to replace the barbell on the platform. So the aim of the jerk, as it's just kind of been described, is we're trying to get the weight from the chest, from the rack position to above the head with the arms locked, and then bringing the feet back underneath the body so the body's then nice and still, and that's the completion. And whilst the jerk starts at the shoulders, it is not a shoulder and arm exercise. Majority of the work is done through a sudden dipping of the thighs and hips and an explosive jump in the air so the bar pops off the shoulders. It is important to be as explosive as possible in this phase of the lift, otherwise the bar will not get enough height and it'll be difficult to get the body down underneath the bar in order to catch it. Unlike both the snatch and clean, there are two main ways to jerk, with the parallel stance, which is what we see with the squat jerk or power jerk, or utilising a split stance position, the split jerk. There are a few style variations between elite lifters, but not as many as in the snatch and the clean. Biggest difference is in the width of the hands and the rack position of the clean, and which type of jerk, squat, power or split, is preferred and performed. So here we see the kind of power jerk. So what we're looking at here is a dip and drive to get the bar moving upwards. And then as the bar is moving upwards, we push ourselves underneath the bar and dip down into a kind of partial overhead squat for the catch. Now we're not kind of actually moving the feet on this one. There's not really much weight, it doesn't really require it. But obviously as you do the after you've done the drive phase and the feet are kind of on the toes, then again we can kind of look to shift the feet laterally and adopt a slightly wider catch position. Power jerk and the squat jerk are essentially the same, it's just that we dip down further and get into a deep overhead squat position. The split jerk then, do a dip and drive, push under, and as we're doing, after the drive and as we're doing the push under, we drop the body by splitting 1 foot forwards and 1 foot backwards. On the recovery then, the idea is to then bring both feet back underneath the bar, back up to effectively the original start position. Only when both feet are underneath the body and the bar and the body is motionless has the lift been completed. So if we look at the kind of phases of the jerk as a quick recap, we have the setup, which is our kind of rack position, hands maybe moved slightly wider than we had for the clean. We then do our dip down as a partial squat, drive upwards, our push under, catch, and then bring the feet back underneath the bar for the recovery. For the power jerk, all the same phases, same setup. We do our dip, drive is all the same. It's just that rather than splitting the feet forwards and backwards, we push ourselves under, maintain a parallel stance, catch it in a narrow grip overhead squat, and then the recovery is just simply pushing up to a standing position. So for the jerk, key coaching on the setup, bars in the rack position, hands are on the bar, elbows are going to be down slightly to help us project the bar upwards. Chest is up, core is braced, shoulders can be shrugged upwards slightly as well, which helps, and the torso is vertical. For the dip, it's a fast partial squat down. Try to keep the torso vertical, feet flat on the ground. It's predominantly done by flexing the knees, and then you don't want to pause as you change direction and move into the drive phase. So it's a very quick dip down and then straight in the opposite direction for the drive. For the drive phase, you're going to move the head back so the bar doesn't hit the chin. You're going to use the legs and hips to drive the bar straight upwards. Keep the torso vertical, and as you drive, you're going to come up onto the toes. And again, we want to make sure that we don't pause after the dip. So up until this point, whether it's a split jerk or power jerk has been exactly the same. We'll look at the power jerk now and the slight differences. So for the push under, so as the bar's moving upwards, you want to change direction, push the body under the bar as it rises. We can shift the feet apart in order to get into a slightly easier catch position. You're going to rebend the knees into an overhead squat position, lock the elbows out, push the chest forwards underneath the bar. So for the catch, we're going to push upwards against the bar to decelerate it, push forcibly into the floor with the legs. As we said, chest is up, looking forward, and we're going to decelerate the bar before it goes too deep. The recovery then, keeping the arms locked, you're going to extend the legs, push upwards, back up to a standing position, and focus on keeping the hips forward under the bar as you do the ascent. For the split jerk, as we said, these phases are slightly different from the power jerk. So for the push under, again, as you're going to change direction, push the body under the bar as it rises. To help us drop the body down, we're going to split our feet forwards and backwards, so one forward, one backwards, drop into a split squat position. You're going to be on the balls of the rear foot, front foot is going to be flat, that front knee is over the front ankle. You're going to lock the elbows out, and again, push the chest forward under the bar. So for the catch, you can again push upwards against the bar to decelerate it, push forcibly into the floor, particularly with the front foot, limit rear knee bend for stability, and again, chest up, looking forwards. And then the recovery, we're going to keep those arms locked. You're going to slide the front foot back halfway and then step forwards with the rear foot back to a parallel stance position. So learning the jerk usually takes a slightly different approach to the snatch and the clean. Instead of learning in a top-down approach, the jerk tends to be learnt by first learning how to complete the dip and drive phases. So regardless of which style of jerk is being employed, the first two phases, the dip and drive, are performed in an identical way. So the dip, the first element of the jerk is to learn how to perform the correct dipping movement. So when dipping, both the knees and hips should be flexed in order to load the anterior and posterior muscles of the hips and thighs, and this will utilize the stretch shortening cycle. It is important that not too great a knee and hip flexion is performed, i.e. you don't want to squat down too deep, as this can be actually more disadvantageous in relation to force production. So if you want to produce the maximum amount of force, doing too big a squat is actually and then onto the drive. So once the hips and knees have been flexed, the body's in the kind of power position again. And this position, just like with the catch, with the snatch and the clean, allows the lifter to impart the maximum force on the bar. So the best exercise to start learning how to do the dip and drive is the push press, as it helps to mimic the dip and drive when performed correctly, as it pretty much mimics it. So the push press is effectively the dip and drive, same as we did with the jerk, but rather than then pushing ourselves underneath the bar, we then use the arms and shoulders to press the final phase. So that same dip and drive is what's going to get the bar moving upwards. And rather than pushing our body underneath so we can lock our arms out, in this case we're just going to continue to move the bar upwards by extending the arms, pressing up with the kind of shoulders. Errors with the dip are going to be no hip or knee flexion, so that it must be a partial squat with the torso kept vertical in order to load both the knee extensors and hip extensors. You may have also, the other end of the spectrum, too much hip or knee flexion. So in order to generate maximal elastic energy, the squat must be fast, it must be through a partial range of motion, and there must be no pause. So too deep a squat will decrease the potential power output. Any forwards lean will also place additional stress on the back extensors and will throw off the optimal bar trajectory. Other errors would include, for the drive, would include pausing after the dip. So we just mentioned that a minute ago. So again, in order to generate maximum elastic energy from the dip, there must be no pause between the descent of the dip, the eccentric phase, and the ascent with the drive, the concentric phase. So pausing will decrease the potential peak height of the bar by decreasing the kind of elastic energy component. And so you're actually going to not lift the bar up as high, or you're going to not be able to lift as much weight. Another error with the drive, we're going to see no triple joint extension. So just as with the second pull, the drive of the jerk is where the peak forces are found. So the plantar flexors, the knee extensors and the hip extensors must work together to produce this triple extension and fully extend their joints to generate maximum power. So yes, we are going to extend the hips fully, going to extend the knees, and we're going to come up onto the toes. Push under phase. So whereas the snatch and clean utilizes a pulling under phase, the jerk uses a push under phase. It's important to physically press against the bar as it raises up overhead and try to push the body underneath so as to reduce the amount of vertical displacement needed in order to perform a successful lift. I.e., the more you can dip yourself underneath it, it means you don't have to push it up or dip and drive it up quite as high. So in performing the push under, it's important to understand that a power squat or split jerk needs to be performed in order to catch that bar. So if we kind of look at the split drop, this is obviously what we're going to be utilizing for the split jerk technique, and this can help us to kind of get used to dropping the body weight quickly, which is what's going to happen during the push under phase. So we're just going to have the arms on the kind of shoulders, but all we kind of do here is just split 1 foot forwards, 1 foot backwards, and you see how the hips drop nice and quickly. Obviously, as this is just one way we kind of split it, upper body and lower body. So you can just focus on dropping the body by splitting the legs without having to concentrate on pushing the body underneath the bar at the same time. So it can work as quite a nice drill to kind of teach half of what's going to be happening during the push under phase. Errors with the push under then are going to be no speed of movement. So just like the pull under for the snatch and clean, there's a very small amount of time as the bar rises, then peaks, and then starts to drop again. In that short space of time, the lifter must change direction, adjust stance, and lock the elbows out in preparation for the catch. The other error is not pushing the chest forward. So this will result in the bar usually being a little bit too far forward, and the lifter either having to step forward to rebalance, or the bar will drop in front for a missed lift. So as discussed previously, there are 3 main techniques that can be used in catching the bar overhead. Got the power jerk, split jerk, and squat jerk. So we're just going to look at predominantly the power and split varieties. So the power variety involves finishing in a semi-squat catch position, and the split variety involves finishing with 1 leg forward and 1 leg back. In order to successfully catch the bar, that is with locked out elbows, it is important that the last error of the push under is focused upon. So it's easy to miss the catch if the chest has not been pushed underneath the bar. So to catch successfully, the bar needs to be above and almost behind the head. If we look at errors with the catch then, arms not being locked out, so having the elbows bent will result in either having to press out to finish the lift, which isn't allowed in competitions, or the arms collapsing under the load and causing injury. So you want to focus on coaching the athlete to get full lockout for the catch, and if they can't, they may have mobility restrictions at the shoulder, the drive may not be getting the bar up sufficiently high enough, or the push under may not be getting the body low enough. Other errors, they may be relaxed at the catch, and again, just like the snatch and the clean, you must be actively pushing up against the bar and downwards against the floor with the core and upper. Errors on the catch and specific to the power jerk, feet being too wide or too narrow, and this will vary depending on the individual, but too narrow will limit the depth of the catch. Too wide is usually an instinctive adaptation to having restrictions in dorsiflexion when squatting overhead, but neither is that stable or that efficient. So you want to play around just like we did with the previous exercises during your style sessions to assess individual variation. What is a good catch stance or width of stance, and have a coach oversee to ensure that the stance is still going to be effective. Errors with the catch for the split jerk. Again, this may be feet too wide or too narrow. So for optimal stability, the feet should move straight forwards and backwards from the kind of setup stance. So if we kind of see that setup stance on the left-hand side, as we split the feet, one should move forward, one should move backwards. So we almost kind of coach that the feet are on a set of train tracks. So if you imagine kind of two train track lines with the image on the left-hand side, what we want to coach then is just to move one forward and one backwards, as we see with the image in the middle, rather than trying to bring both feet, so you're almost trying to do like a tightrope walk. And the reason for that is because that will be very unstable and the bar will likely drop. Other errors may include the back knee being too bent, and this will decrease the tension on the hips through the hip flexor, reduce stability, and probably lead to that leg collapsing under the load. So the catch position, it isn't a lunge, it is more of a split stance with the rear leg much straighter at the knee than we would find if we were lunging. Another error, rear foot being rotated, as we see with the image at the bottom, and the foot should be pointing forwards with the heel raised and the weight on the ball of the foot. This can be due to tight hip flexors of the rear leg, and as such you try and take the stress off those hip flexors and put it onto the adductors by rotating that hip, or it may just be a lack of knowledge of what the correct technique is. So here we see that feet position for the catch, particularly on the split jerk. So we do our dip and drive, come up onto the toes, and then one foot moves forward, one foot moves backwards. So we don't want them coming too close together, so it's almost like you're doing a tightrope. We don't want them moving too far apart either. We don't want it to be too narrow. When we do split them forwards and backwards, you do need to get into a reasonable depth, but we also don't want it to be too wide either. And that's where we're trying to get a nice happy medium between all of these things. Now, which style of jerk is employed will depend on many factors, probably more based in flexibility and mobility of the individual lifter than which lift is easier to perform. So those that struggle with overhead parallel stance squatting will probably gravitate more towards the split jerk as their lift of preference. It is the case that the majority of elite level lifters use the split variety, but some of the top lifters will also use the others. Some will use the power jerk, some will use the squat jerk. Again, it all boils down to a little bit of preference. Now looking at these jerk variations, so the split jerk, pros of that, it's going to be easier to get into the overhead squat catch position. Usually slightly lower depth than with a power jerk. The cons on the downside, it is less stable for the catch position. You have to slide and step for the recovery, and it can create bilateral differences if you only ever train on one side. Power jerk, well, pros, it is more stable for the recovery. You're already in a parallel stance. You don't have to move your feet forwards or backwards. The downside is it does require more mobility in the shoulders and thoracic spine and ankles in order to get into that slightly narrower grip overhead squat position. If you're doing a squat jerk, the pros and cons again are just going to be exemplified. So you should complete the review questions for this module to ensure you've met the learning outcomes, and then complete the guided practice. You should practice the exercises first so you're happy with the techniques, and then practice teaching the techniques to a couple of colleagues so you can practice both explaining and coaching the exercises. Once you've completed the guided practice, then move on to the next module.